Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for another episode with Cast with Haris. I've got a wonderful panel here today. I've got Samya Hasan and Nikhita Dogra from CASSA. Um, and let me just start off by introducing Samya and the organization CASSA. So CASSA is the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. And what they do is they're an umbrella company or an organization that provide services to South Asian communities. And I'm going to let Samya, just go on a little bit and introduce herself and CASSA as well in a general sense. So Samya, tell me a little bit about CASSA. First of all, so Samya is the managing director for CASSA. Is that right?
Executive director, but same thing.
Executive director for CASSA. And she's been with CASSA since 2015 in various different opportunities there. Samya is she's had her master's from York University of Toronto in public policy, right? So Samya, before I screw this up, you start and introduce yourself and tell me what CASSA does and what you do here.
Sure, I'll be happy to take over so you don't butcher my bio anymore. Thanks so much for inviting us to be part of this podcast. CASSA, I'm going to briefly introduce you. I'm not going to bore you for too long. We're a social justice umbrella organization. We serve organizations that serve South Asian communities. So what that means is the structure that we follow is a membership structure. So we have over 120 agencies that provide frontline services to South Asians across the province. And we represent them on various different spheres. So we do political advocacy on their behalf. We work with all three levels of government to ensure that the needs of the South Asian communities in Ontario and generally across the country are being met. We look at what barriers the communities are facing and we try to address those barriers by, again, doing advocacy. We do a lot of research work. We do a lot of policy work and capacity building for our members. One of the things that we have gotten ourselves into, and I'll let Nikhita talk a little bit more about that, is in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past, we haven't been an organization that has provided frontline services, but we've seen in the pandemic that South Asian communities have been very highly impacted, and the disproportionate rates of infection among members of our communities has been really troubling and disturbing. So we've gotten into a lot of COVID relief work. So that's one of the things that we do. But other than that, we also have other ongoing projects around health equity, around equity in education. We do work around legal education. We have projects on employment equity. So anything under the sun that's impacting the community, that's what we do.
And that's great because I think that would give me a lot of reasons for you to come on again, so we can talk about a lot of different topics in the South Asian community and different things that affect us in different ways, right? So today's focus will be on the COVID-19 vaccine and the initiative that you guys have taken on to get the information out there to our communities and how you're doing that. And that's where Nikhita comes in, right? Nikhita, you go ahead and introduce yourself. Talk to me a little bit about what you do for CASSA, and go ahead.
Sure. So thank you. Again, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm also working at CASSA here as a project manager for our COVID-19 relief initiatives. As Samya already mentioned, we've been providing information and resources for our South Asian community. I personally have a background in medicine. I hold an MD and I'm currently working towards Canadian residency so I can practice here in Canada. I also hold an MPH, Master's in Public Health, where I've specialized in preventative medicine.
Okay.
And even before I knew I wanted to do medicine, I've been really passionate about getting into public health. So I'm extremely grateful to have been able to do that this past year and be here today.
Okay.
So a little bit more about our initiatives. As Samya mentioned, one of our major goals has been to provide information resources to our community. And what that's included is a COVID-related helpline. to kind of bridge the gap, the language gap and the information gap that may be out there. And also what we've been doing is we've been creating short infographics in this past year to kind of make sure everybody has, like the facts going forward. And what we've done is we've made these available in various South Asian languages as well. So it's not just English.
Okay.
So we can help bridge that, yeah.
And I'm going to link that to my podcast here so people can actually look at it and also download it if they needed to, just to have that infographic that you're talking about available to them. So I appreciate that. Go over the infographic a little bit, and I'm going to post that on screen as well so people are looking at it. Just go over the infographic that you're talking about and tell me a little bit about what we're seeing here.
Okay, so one of the first ones that should be there is it just talks about what exactly a vaccine is.
Okay.
There's a lot of misinformation out there, so we need to get the facts out there so everybody knows. So what exactly does a vaccine do? What's so different about the vaccines that we're seeing today with the mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna? And so I can go into that a little bit if that's...
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
Okay. So vaccine, what it basically does, a traditional vaccine, it will deliver part of a virus, like a weakened virus, into our body. And what that does is it triggers our immune system to create a response. And that is important because the next time our body, for example, comes into contact with the real virus, it'll recognize it and know how to fight it off. So that's the basic concept of a vaccine.
Okay.
Why these are special or why these are different is they're mRNA vaccines. So they don't actually insert the virus into our body. What they're inserting is mRNA, which is basically, if you imagine a string of information that can go inside your cell and instruct your cell to create a specific protein that's specific to the virus involved, for example, COVID-19. So once
I think that's one of the, I think that's one of the misconceptions that people may have, is that the vaccine is actually injecting COVID-19 into our body, but that's not the case, right?
No, not at all.
Okay,
yeah.
good. No, go ahead, please.
So mRNA is basically that piece of information. It's not the virus. It's basically instructing us to create a bit of that protein. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Some questions may arise like, okay, which vaccine should I get? Like if, we get the opportunity to get the vaccine, how do you make that decision? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
For sure. So there are some requirements as to who can get which of the vaccines. One of the main ones is like an age requirement, I believe. So I believe Pfizer is available for people 16 and older.
Okay.
Whereas Moderna is available for people 18 and older.
Okay.
So that's actually one of the main requirements. Also, as we know, there are 2 shots required. So there is a difference in the time difference between getting the 2 shots. So those are some of the requirements as well. There are some concerns as to the allergic reactions one might get from the different vaccines.
Okay.
So that is also there. Again, those will be very technical details, but.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? In terms of, I know that Pfizer has the 2 shots that you're supposed to get, and the different the vaccines have different time frames as well. So Pfizer, you can get the second shot at, the 40-day mark. And I believe if I'm wrong, please correct me, Moderna has a 28-day mark for the second shot. And also there's huge concerns about logistical aspects of the vaccines as well, right? In terms of storage and how we keep them and all that kind of stuff. So tell me a little bit about that too.
For sure. So you were right with the Moderna, it's a 28-day cycle. Pfizer, however, it's 21 days apart,
21.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you brought up a great point about the storage. So that's actually a little bit of why these vaccines are different, because they do require proper storage, like very low temperatures, for example.
Okay.
So that is one of the reasons, we've heard about how it's difficult to get them to remote communities, for example, because of the storage conditions. So that is needed to keep the mRNA stabilized. So that's one of the things we hear often, yes.
Okay, so now in terms of specifically relating to our community, the South Asian community, what are some of the concerns that you're seeing? Like, what are the concerns that you're seeing in our community that pertain to the virus, and what can we do about it?
For sure. So one of the main questions that we often hear is, I might get COVID-19 by getting the vaccine. So that's, we already briefly mentioned it, but again, this vaccine isn't inserting the actual virus into our body.
Okay.
So it's not infectious.
Okay.
There's no live virus, so there's no chance of you getting infected. People have also been asking, it's been a common question that will it change my DNA given that it's being inserted into my cells?
Mm-hmm.
And that can get a little technical, but the short answer to that is no. mRNA doesn't even get inside to that part of your cell where the DNA is stored, and it gets destroyed right after it, right after the protein is made. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, those are some common questions we get.
I mean, as I sit, gathered in a group of uncles that we sit with, and we have a discussion about, COVID and vaccines and all that kind of stuff. Not that we're doing it anymore right now, but, I'm just generally saying that it's going to happen in the future. Some of the things might come up like some conspiracy theories and things like, okay, the vaccines are there to, cause some other issues or other problems in our bodies that we may face in the future. Is there any evidence to that? Is there any evidence that it may cause long-term effects or any reactions? I mean, vaccines may cause reactions, and any existing vaccine also does the same thing. But this is something new, right? So people are more scared and things that that they don't know about, right? So tell me a little bit about that. Like what's the long-term effects? Is there any, proven long-term effects or something that we're seeing with any of these vaccines?
Can I just jump in before you give your medical response, Nikita? I think since before the vaccines were even developed, we saw in the community information spreading about the vaccines.
Yeah.
So we've seen these WhatsApp messages that spread like fire in the community, where people are saying the vaccine is going to cause infertility, or they're going to cause stillborn. So it's just people making up a lot of things without knowing the right information. And we even saw that since the beginning of the pandemic, people are spreading misinformation about cures, about doing like desi style remedies to cure the virus. We've seen in the States, the president there creating his own versions of the cure. So there has been more misinformation about the virus and the vaccine than the correct information spreading. So I think it's very important to point out the danger of spreading that kind of information. As community members and leaders in our community, it's very important that we analyze what we're sharing before we share it on WhatsApp or any other communication channel. So I'm gonna let Nikita talk about some of the medical tests that have been done here in Canada before the vaccines were rolled out. As we know that our healthcare system is quite developed with gaps. Yes, still there's a lot of gaps of health inequalities that happen. But in terms of the testing that's been done, I'll let Nikita speak to that and the safety of the the vaccine.
Yeah.
For sure. That's actually a great point, Samya. Thank you. And regarding long-term effects and all of that, as we know, there have been millions of doses that have been administered up till now, and there have been extensive clinical trials that have been done. Very few people have reported severe side effects, and that includes any allergic reactions. And so far, there's been no long-term adverse effects that have been reported that we know of. Again, this is a new vaccine, so there are side effects with every sort of treatment that comes forward. But the most common side effects we see in vaccines are allergic side effects, for example, right after you receive the dose. And that can include anything from fever to muscle aches to chills. But that's normal with every vaccine.
Yeah, and I've definitely, you're right. So people may have questions to say, if they have had a vaccine before in the past and they've had any reactions to that vaccine. Would you say, and again, I'd like to mention to everybody that obviously you're not giving your medical opinion about this, but rather, just kind of setting the information straight. So people who would have had reactions to any other vaccines in the past, is it safe for them to also take the COVID-19 vaccine, knowing that they've had a reaction before?
For sure. So there are different types of reactions. For example, if you've had an anaphylactic reaction, it's very severe. Again, you should always consult your family doctor before getting these vaccines, or any vaccine for that matter, so they're fully aware of your medical history. But each vaccine, there might be slight differences in the list of ingredients they may have. And again, with Pfizer and Moderna and all these vaccines these days, they've actually released a detailed list of what all their vaccines include. So you can actually go online and see what there is in there, and see if you already know, for example, maybe you were allergic to eggs. And if this, again, they do not contain eggs, this is just an example.
Yeah.
You kind of can get informed going forward. But yeah, again, there's no definite answer to that. I would say you have to consult your family doctor to make sure, it's safe for you going forward.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's a good point that you mentioned, to know the ingredients of the vaccine as well, because if you've got a particular allergy with any other things like eggs or other substances, you can check that out and make that decision going forward. Other questions that people may have is, after getting vaccinated, do they still have to abide by the healthcare measures like wearing a mask and social distancing and all that kind of stuff? Now I'm talking about a point that obviously we're going to see how it's going to play out, but general speaking, like if I get the vaccine today, do I still have to worry about people who have COVID-19 and all that kind of stuff?
For sure. That's actually a great point, and it's a very common question asked.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, even if you say you get a vaccine tomorrow, we still have to maintain our physically distant guidelines, because there is a small chance that you can still get infected.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone has been vaccinated yet. Transmission is still possible. Maybe we have had the vaccine, but the person we walk past may not have had it yet. So it doesn't guarantee full immunity until everybody's, at least the majority of the population at least, has been vaccinated or has had the infection already. We cannot take these physical distancing guidelines lightly.
So this may be a question for Samya a little bit. Samya, tell me a little bit about what CASSA is doing in terms of within our community to, not just get the information out there, but also, people, like, tell me about the helpline. Like what are more things that CASSA is doing to get this out there?
Sure. So maybe let me talk a little bit about the impact first before I talk about what we're doing. So over the last couple of months, we've been contacted by various different public health units, so whether at the provincial level or the municipal level. And as of July of 2020, they've started collecting race-based data. So this data shows if people choose to report when they get tested, which ethnicity or race they are, or they consider themselves, or they identify with. So we've seen, since that data has started to be collected as of last year, we've seen consistently South Asian communities have been impacted disproportionately higher than all other racialized communities and non-racialized communities, especially in the city of Toronto and Peel region. And also, I don't have the data for cities in Alberta and BC or Quebec, but I know across the country, the rates of South Asian communities is much higher. So the public health units are kind of scrambling first to know why this is happening and how they can support the communities in getting these rates under control.
Why do you think, sorry to interrupt, why do you think it's happening? Like, I mean, tell me about like things in our community that we are doing, or we may not be doing, things like social distancing and wearing a mask or having parties. Why is it that you think is happening? Why do we
So I
have a
think
higher
that's a
rate?
very common answer for our community to kind of blame themselves for something. But I think the important part is looking at the systemic issues. So, I mean, all communities are trying their best to follow social distancing regulations. We know the South Asian communities, majority of the community is doing very much the same thing that other communities are doing. And in every community, there are people that don't believe this is a real virus. We have those people in all communities, and we've seen a lot of that rhetoric coming from the south of us, from the states, about anti-vaccination groups and things like that. So there's a lot of I could go on for like 30 minutes on why this is happening, but let me just briefly summarize it for you. South Asian communities are overrepresented in precarious labor, so they work in frontline jobs. They come into the country or they're born here, and they get qualifications and experience that's sometimes higher than the rest of the population, but the jobs that they end up getting are not commensurate to that. So they get jobs that are, maybe frontline grocery stores or Amazon. So Amazon is known as a big company that is using South Asians for their frontline services. They're represented in personal support work, so they actually tend to people that have gotten the virus, and they're moved from one home to another because it's a part-time job and they can't make ends meet with that one job. Another reason is that the South Asian communities, their health hasn't received the same kind of resources as other communities. So we've been saying to all three levels of government that there's a specific way to address culturally appropriate ways to address healthcare for certain communities, and we need to invest resources in doing that. That they haven't opened up their eyes to that until now, and I think now they're trying to find ways to communicate and to create community-based planning for their health programs. So those are just two reasons, but there are more, and I would just say like systemic issues are the main cause for why the communities are being disproportionately impacted. In terms of what we are doing, so we have this helpline. It's a helpline for South Asian communities. It's an information service where you can call in and you can get service in 5 different South Asian languages. So Hindi, Urdu, Bangla, Tamil, and Punjabi. And the live specialist can provide you information about where you can get support, what the regulations are, what health and safety guidelines you are to follow, what the different, so we have a lockdown order, what that means, so people are not getting into trouble. So if you have a hard time understanding English and you're not able to get, that information online, or by just listening to the news, you can just call in that helpline, and maybe you can attach the helpline information to your podcast channel.
Absolutely.
So that's one thing, and we're trying to expand that helpline. It also has information recorded. As Nikhita said, we've been creating infographics since the beginning of the pandemic. Now we're also looking into doing animations. So we've been told that videos will work better with people. And so short 1 to 2 minute animations, and then translating them into the different languages and trying our best to do outreach and spread that in the community.
That's a great idea. It's wonderful. Nikita, any closing remarks that you may have in terms of what we just talked about, or anything else that you want to add?
No, actually, I think we talked about some very important points, and Samya covered a very good aspect as well. But yeah, I would like to say there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I think we should all do our part and make sure we know the facts before we take any decisions, because that's very important. And whether that includes talking to your family physician or anybody else, like I think it's good to stay on top of that.
And that's a good point. And I would like to say that a lot of the misinformation that's out there, I have seen firsthand get created even, within our community. So social media plays a huge part in that. How we have our WhatsApp groups and all that kind of stuff plays a huge part in that. So some of these things that we've created for ourselves in terms of the misinformation for the vaccine, we need to kind of address that and kind of keep addressing it, right, until until it goes away. So I really appreciate the part that CASSA is doing, and the two of you playing a front role in getting this information out there. I'm going to link all the information and the infographic that you sent me to my podcast, and get it also out there as well. And I'll also link the information to the helpline that Samya mentioned as well. And I'd like to thank you both again for joining me, getting this information out there. I'd love to have you guys on again. We'll talk about different things, but this is important information that needs to be out. And, as we get closer to getting that vaccine, people need to know the facts about it. So I appreciate that.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, guys.